President Trump is talking about making some big changes to how Americans vote ahead of the midterm elections next year. He's talking about using executive power to do away with mail-in ballots and electronic voting machines. One person with a lot to say about elections is Ken Block. He's a two-time candidate for governor and the author of Disproven, My Unbiased Search for Voter Fraud. Block joins me to talk about elections, voting integrity, the threat of political violence, Rhode Island's economic struggles, and more. Ken Block, how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's start with ongoing fallout from the recent assassination of conservative organizer Charlie Kirk. What do you think should be done to reduce the threat of political violence in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think the only way to reduce the threat is to dial the heat down on the outrage and the partisanship, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon.
The last time we did a long interview was March 2024. At that time, you told me you thought the prosecution of the January 6th defendants would pour cold water on the threat of political violence. Of course, since then, President Trump has pardoned those January 6th defendants. Did that send a message, in your view, in support of that political violence is okay?
It certainly sent a message that with President Trump in power, that the political violence was excused. And I think that sends the wrong message in terms of simmering things down and trying to bridge the divide that we're in right now. It looks like everybody is more interested in sharpening the divide than trying to close it.
Charlie Kirk is being held up as a champion of free speech because of how he went to college campuses and he invited arguments with people who had different views from him. The New York Times columnist Ezra Klein called that practicing politics the right way. But Kirk also supported the creation of a professor watch list that identified professors, lecturers, other people in academia whose views were contrary to those of conservative ideology. Some of those people face threats and harassment. Kirk also advocated for the state suppression of his political opponents, and he backed President Trump's false conspiracy theory that the 2020 election was stolen. So why, in your view, are we hearing so much about the good part of Kirk's legacy as far as supporting free speech while not hearing about how, in some ways, he did some things contrary to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really opine as an expert on everything that Kirk has said or didn't say or did or didn't do. What I can say is that the First Amendment is broad and it tolerates speech, even repugnant speech, and makes sure that it's allowed, right? And there actually aren't all that many elements of free speech that are regulated or prohibited under the First Amendment. Nobody should ever have any harm come to them because they're exercising their right of free speech. So I just want to say that for the record, that the price that Charlie Kirk paid for his speech is unacceptable in a democracy. It's unacceptable here, regardless of what he said. And, I exercise free speech, and it would be very scary to me if there were people that were threatening me because of the speech. Actually, I have had people threaten me for the speech that I've had over the years. I don't know that any of the threats were all that serious, but, a decade ago, we didn't have the same concerns that we have now, where the trigger to violence seems to be much more easily set than it did, let's say, a decade ago.
Let's talk a little bit more about the First Amendment and free speech. ABC has walked back its suspension of Jimmy Kimmel, although the broadcaster Sinclair, which operates Channel 10 and Channel 6 in Rhode Island, says it's not going to show Kimmel's show. Kimmel's remarks about Charlie Kirk seem not really that different from the way that many late-night talk show hosts talk about politics. And we see how President Trump is urging the Justice Department to go after his critics and political opponents. You mentioned the First Amendment. How do you see the outlook for free speech in the current moment?
So it's one thing to go after; it's another to go after successfully. The act of going after somebody for exercising their legitimate First Amendment rights to free speech is an attempt to tamp down free speech. I don't believe that the courts are going to start determining that what amounts to allowed free speech is all of a sudden not allowed anymore. I believe that there are a lot of originalists on the Supreme Court, and I don't see them undoing probably the biggest original piece of our Constitution that we have, which is the right to free speech, First Amendment, number one. So I think that we're seeing some attempts at repression of speech, but I don't think, I always get in trouble when I say this, but I don't think those attempts are going to become legally successful.
President Trump vowed to be the retribution for his supporters, and he describes his efforts as payback for what he describes as political persecution that he faced from Democrats. Do you think that's right, or do you see it differently?
We are in a tit-for-tat political world right now, and I fear that that will continue for the foreseeable future at this point. The more extreme our government is in relation to the party in opposition, the more likely that there will be repercussions to those positions when there's the inevitable change in terms of which party controls Washington. So it's not a good thing, and look, politics is in many ways speech. And the attempt to not minimize, but the attempt to deny speech to the party of opposition is dangerous and wrong. My background is I think both parties have disserved the public over time, and I went so far as to create my own political party, one that focused in on the issues that people care about as opposed to issues for party's sake, which I think is a lot of what we have right now. I worry that the Democrats don't have a great national message right now. And I think that the Republicans have gotten a lot of their supporters questioning what it is they need to do. Lots of uncertainty in terms of which party can control Congress in the next session and the upcoming 2028 election. There's a lot of unknowns. And I fear that to overcome those unknowns, we may be subjected to a lot more narrowing of rights as opposed to the widening of rights.
Speaking of Democrats, we saw how former President Biden was slow to respond to inflation, slow to respond to concerns about immigration. He left Kamala Harris a very short runway for trying to retain the White House. How much responsibility do Democrats bear, in your view, for the return of Donald Trump to the White House?
Almost all of it. I think that from my perspective, President Biden was not up to the job, certainly evidenced by that disastrous debate that he had. It was clear to me way before that debate that President Biden should have been a one-term president, that he didn't, that Harris wasn't given enough time to define herself and campaign the way it was needed, or it could have been any other Democrat, right? I mean, the Democrat Party really failed us in terms of bringing forward a candidate who was fully vetted and prepared and could go toe-to-toe with Trump. On the other hand, Trump did a really masterful job at finding the votes he needed in the swing states to ensure his election, right? The election wasn't a national election. The election really was 6 or 7 swing states, about 2 million votes across those swing states, and Trump figured out how to get those votes. The Democrats weren't even competitive there, right? They were running a 50-state race as opposed to the 6 swing states and figuring out how to ensure that those swing votes went the Democrats' way. They weren't on the playing field.
You're a businessman and you wrote something on Facebook this week supporting President Trump's initiative charging $100,000 for an H-1B visa that's meant to help tech-savvy immigrant workers to come to the U.S. and work. I wonder, from your perspective as a business person, how do you assess President Trump's overall economic program? Of course, his tariffs have been very controversial. So what are your thoughts?
So I very much am against the tariffs. We are starting to see the impact of tariffs on the economy. It will, long-term economic trends take a while to come out. So I'm very worried what's going to happen to us economically as the tariffs bite harder. We have seen a dramatic change in the stature of the United States on the global stage. And I think that a lot of world leaders not only look at the United States differently, I think that they understand Trump better and they're not afraid to stand up to him. So I think generally speaking, I think we're on a fairly disastrous course in terms of that. As far as the H-1B visas, that's my industry. A lot of those visas went to very young, inexperienced foreign workers who came in, and they were being paid well under what relatively young, new U.S. tech workers were being paid, and it was hurting our entire tech industry because the only way you get seasoned software engineers is if you bring up junior ones and you get them the training that they need. And that was a very difficult marketplace while we were being flooded with young, inexperienced foreign workers that were being paid a pittance relative to U.S. workers.
You founded the Moderate Party of Rhode Island, ran as the moderate candidate for governor in 2010. Then you walked away from the party and ran for governor as a Republican in 2014, lost the primary to Alan Fung. I wonder, are you still a Republican?
I'm still a registered Republican, yes.
And given I'm sure you're not on board with everything that President Trump is doing, why some people might love President Trump, some people are very critical of him. What is your decision to remain a Republican based on?
So I would be what people might call Rockefeller Republican. There are still lots of folks in the political situation that I'm in right now. In Rhode Island in particular, I have problems with how the Democrat Party runs the state. I think that we're on a fairly disastrous course here, and it's evidenced by some of our biggest companies picking up and leaving, and we're on the ropes economically in several different ways. And so I don't agree with how the Democrats have done things, and that doesn't leave a lot of alternatives to how I'm registered. My experience with having started a third political party is it's one thing to overcome the burden to launch the party. That was pretty big all by itself. But then to keep it and to be successful down the road requires far too many other things to go right. And for me, it wasn't practical to continue trying to work on that. It required more resources than I was willing to throw at it, and it required a lot more acceptance on the part of the public to entertain third parties as serious entities as opposed to crackpots. So, I'm sitting here scratching my head. I still don't feel like I really have a political home here in Rhode Island, and I'm not sure what to do about it.
You've studied elections and you published a book last year, Disproven, based on your experience of having been contacted by the Trump administration after the 2020 election and asked to investigate whether there was any fraud. Your results showed that, in your view, there was not any significant fraud that would have, to the extent that would have changed the outcome of the election. We're coming up on midterms next year in 2026. How are you feeling about the integrity of the vote in America?
So the one positive from all of the false claims about voter fraud is, by and large, most states have tightened up their election data, and they have taken steps to make likely areas of fraud less likely. I think that's probably the only positive that's come out of asking those questions. Georgia has some of the squeakiest clean data in the country now, based on the ringer they were put through for 4 years over the claims of fraud that happened there. We didn't have excessive amounts of voter fraud. Certainly nothing to overturn a federal election from what I've been able to determine. There's even less now than based on how things have been cleaned up. I think there's a lot more that we can do. We have a very odd election system and infrastructure, and as one of the most technologically competent and advanced societies on the earth, how we do our elections and the issues that we have with them still are pretty mind-blowing, and they really shouldn't be there.
President Trump has talked about using his executive power to undo mail ballot voting and the use of electronic voting machines. He does not have the legal authority to do that by executive power, but I wonder, is that should people be concerned about that?
That won't stand up. The Constitution says very clearly that the states are responsible for the conduct of elections. The executive power of the president's office does not have that power. It's one thing to issue the executive order. It's another thing to enforce it. It's not enforceable. President Trump has issued several different executive orders that have no force of law behind them, and they're just sitting there, and they're not affecting policy changes.
Rhode Island Secretary of State Greg Amore's office said last week it would not cooperate with a Department of Justice request for sensitive voter information in Rhode Island. Some red states have been more willing to provide this info, and blue states generally less willing. The thinking is that this could come to a court fight. What is your level of concern about that?
I'm not concerned about it. The federal government has all of our private data one way or another. So asking for it from the states doesn't, to me, seem to pose a particular risk. If the Department of Justice is using that data in an effort to help states clean up their voter rolls, as you know, what your listeners and viewers may or may not understand is that there really isn't a mechanism in place to help ensure that somebody who's registered in Rhode Island is not also registered in Texas, for example. The states maintain their voter rolls in a silo. If the Department of Justice is working to de-silo that information and provide states a mechanism in which to know with certainty that there's duplicate registrations and things like that, I think that would be a positive way to go. I hate that the maintenance of our voter rolls has become something that partisans fight over. It should be a straightforward thing where we want to make sure that nationally someone's registered to vote just in one place. I don't see how that can offend anyone's partisan sensibilities.
President Trump has dispatched military and the National Guard to some American cities. Does this raise a specter of as far as voting? And do you think there will be any efforts to discourage certain voting blocks in the midterm elections?
I don't know. Is it possible that the deployments of National Guards to certain cities now is a trial balloon? Sure, I suppose that could be the case. Can and will the National Guard insert itself between voters and the voting booths? Very difficult to see that. You have to remember that the National Guard members, even the members of the military, they're U.S. citizens first and foremost, and I think putting them into unacceptable conflicts will eventually cause big problems, I think, between the executive office and the different military branches.
Before we come back to some more serious questions, I'd like to go in a different avenue and ask, what was the most fun you had this summer?
Oh, what a great question. So by far the most fun is my wife and I, to celebrate our anniversary. We went to Portugal, and we spent 8 days, 4 in Lisbon and 4 in on the South Coast, and it was fabulous. We want to go back, and we're looking forward to getting a lot more travel in. As it becomes a little bit easier to do as the kids are out of the house finally.
Congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you.
Let's come back to Rhode Island's economy. I mean, it seems like forever Rhode Island has been trying to invent a new economy. You talked about the departure of some big entities. The most notable is Hasbro. It seems like that's because the CEO, Chris Cox, had no connection to Rhode Island, its state government. He went to Harvard. He seemed much more of a Boston guy. But Rhode Island's economy has been uneven for many years. What do you think are a handful of things that could be done to put the state on a better track for its economic future?
The biggest challenge we have by far is the General Assembly. Every year there are bills that are put forward that could seriously not only disadvantage Rhode Island businesses, but potentially cost them a fortune. We have a business-unfriendly General Assembly. It's only kept from doing the most harm, usually by speakers who are less prone to doing things that will hurt the economy. But just having the changes raised as a legitimate bill causes reputational harm to us. And the worst possible case would be that one of these bills goes through that jacks taxation beyond where our neighbors are, penalizes people who make a lot of money, right? I mean, there are a number of different things that are being considered, and really the root of all of these challenges is the fact that we have a large budget, and we jumped $4 billion from COVID. During COVID, we haven't dropped our budget since COVID has gone, and everyone's wondering how we can keep paying for it. We can't, and as long as we don't make some changes, we're starving and looking for places where we can tax entities and people for other things. And generally speaking, our General Assembly spends like drunken sailors on leave, and that's a problem for us because we don't have unlimited pockets.
Massachusetts implemented a tax on its upper income earners. Massachusetts and its business climate don't seem to be suffering, at least in the macro sphere. What is your sense?
They have a far healthier economy than we do. If you're trying to make the case that you want people to come here, making it harder for them to come here is not the answer.
To come back to your observation about the General Assembly, we've talked about this off and on for years, and you've pointed out how Republicans are outnumbered in Rhode Island. They're out-resourced compared to the Democratic Party out-resources them. There's just a lot more Democratic infrastructure. But it seems like the Republican Party has sometimes missed opportunities. The party failed to run legislative candidates in a number of pro-Trump districts last time around. What would it take to make more gains for the GOP in the legislature?
I don't know. I mean, the Republican Party here has divides within it, just like the Republican Party does nationally. You have the hardcore conservatives who duke it out with the rhinos, right? I mean, and
Republicans in name only.
Republicans in name only. And Rhode Island's not a state where a hardcore conservative has any legitimate chance at winning a statewide race. We have had conservatives who've won big races. It's been 20 years now, but it wasn't impossible to do. So, the ideology is a problem. The hardcore ideology is a problem. Money is a problem. Organization is a problem. Message is a problem. And they're out-organized. They're out fundraised. And as long as we keep putting forward, as long as the Republican Party puts forward, not that the party really puts them forward, but we have a lot of what I call sacrificial candidates who run for the big offices, who have no money, have no message. They just go to Republican events and put their name on the ballot and get 20% or whatever it is, right? That kind of activity, I think, hurts the party reputationally. And until we get serious candidates putting in serious efforts, it's going to be a real challenge for the Republicans.
It used to be that Republicans did fairly well running for governor in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. In the more recent term, they've been locked out. Rhode Island hasn't elected a Republican governor since Don Carcieri in 2006. Why do you think it's gotten harder for GOP gubernatorial candidates?
Yeah, hardcore ideology. The base demands, now the base is demanding mini Trumps. And a mini Trump for governor won't be successful. right? So I think that the candidates who could bring forward a winning campaign are going to have an increasingly more difficult time coming out of a primary. And we have some of these sacrificial candidates who have the right ideology for the base, but no chance at winning. I believe you're going to see them coming out of the primaries, and your Republicans will continue to get drubbed in the big ticket races here.
Speaking of the race for governor, we're coming up on one next year. Of the actual and potential candidates, who do you think would do the best job putting the state on a better track for the future?
Well, empirically speaking, Governor McKee has not covered himself in glory. I think he's done a miserable job with the bridge. I think he's done a miserable job communicating effectively to the electorate. I really can't put my finger on all that much that he's done that looks to me like something that was successful and something that has really moved our state forward. He's had a lot of small wins, and he really hasn't used his bully pulpit effectively. It's just, there hasn't been anything there. So I can say with certainty, Governor McKee is not the choice. As far as who is, I think we have to see how things progress in terms of the campaigns and how the candidates define themselves. We have to see if there is going to be a credible Republican who's going to run, and then, figure it out from there. But I think it's so early right now. Helena Folks just entered the race. Until we see what she says and how she says it, it's hard for me to say one way or the other.
I'd like to come back to your bygone days as the leader of the moderate party of Rhode Island. Your thinking was that a lot of people are centrist or kind of, socially moderate, economically maybe a little more conservative, and that the two parties are too extreme on either end, and that you could galvanize support around meeting in the middle. Seemed like an appealing idea. Perhaps bad timing. American politics has gotten more and more polarized since, I think it was around 2008 when you started organizing the moderate party. But what are your takeaways from that experience? What would it take to blunt some of the harsh edges of American politics and help to remind people that we have more in common than what divides us?
I think I was probably a decade early in my efforts to launch the moderate party. If I had started it in 2018 as opposed to 2008, it possibly could have been more successful. Maybe now. I mean, there are efforts nationally. You have the Forward Party, which is Andrew Yang's effort. They're organizing in a lot of states and trying to do some things. I do think that the two-party system has definitely let us down and led us to an unacceptable political division of the country. George Washington warned us about political parties and said that he predicted what would be that what is happening to us right now would actually happen. That the political parties would spend more time furthering their interests as opposed to the national interest. I'm paraphrasing what George said, but that's the gist of it. And I think he's right. And I think that the proof is in where we are right now. And we have a very difficult road to get us onto a better path than the one we're heading down right now.
You twice ran for governor. You've been an outspoken citizen activist since then. You have a watchdog group, Watchdog RI. Based on your more than 15 years observing Rhode Island politics, is there anything that you see with the benefit of hindsight that you perhaps would have done differently to perhaps have a different impact?
Well, I think if I wanted to win the governor's race, I would run again as a Democrat, but I wouldn't survive the primary, right? It's very difficult. It's not difficult. It's impossible right now to come out and practice politics in the middle with the parties the way they're organized and the way the base is worked out right now. Don't know what the fix is for that. To me, that's the biggest problem that we have, and it's a puzzle to figure out how to fix it. As far as anything else, I mean, I paid my dues in testifying to the General Assembly over and over and over and over again. It paid off once when we finally did get rid of the master lever, but that was only after bringing hundreds of people to the State House. That's an effort and work that's frustrating, difficult, and it's too slow to make change. I don't know what the faster way is short of armed revolution at this point, which is obviously not going to happen. But we have a problem here. We are stuck in a self-destructive wave of governing ourselves, and I don't see clearly what the answer is to it.
Ken Block, thanks so much for sitting down.